Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're listening from. My name is Eric, and this is the Five Head Podcast. Welcome to Episode 9 of the Five Head Podcast. We're going to talk about this shutdown now that we are officially in one. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, please check out episodes 1 through 8 on YouTube at Middleview Media and on Spotify, Buzzsprout, wherever you get your podcast at Five Head Podcast. So the shutdown is officially here, and there's been a lot of hype about it leading up to it, a lot of finger pointing. And really, this is just kind of a testament of the stark divide between the two main ideologies within our halls of Congress. It's really what it comes down to. The divide between the left and the right has gotten bigger and bigger over the last 10 or 15 years. And now it's being reflected in the fact that we can't ever seem to get any kind of bipartisan legislation done. Nothing major anyway. So we had a continuing resolution proposed by the Republicans to kind of keep the same budget going for the next 7 weeks. And this is where your proof is of this stark divide, because we've had to deal with just continuing resolutions now since the entire Biden administration. Congress just can't seem to come together to pass an actual budget. Instead, it's been continuing resolution after continuing resolution. And I think with how divided we all are, which is reflected in the highest positions of our government, like in Congress, I don't see this ending anytime soon. So I've talked about this divide in previous episodes. And when I talk to people, I talk about it as well. Because back in 2016, I predicted that we would go through a series of one-term presidents. And so far, that's held true. And I believe we're going to continue to go through that until 2036. I think it'll be 2036 where we'll get a real chance of having a 2 consecutive term president. But so far, my prediction that we'll get one-term presidents is held true. And because of that, it has shaken up Congress. People aren't voting for moderates anymore. And because of that, we're seeing one-term presidents, and we're seeing those presidents gain control of Congress for 2 years. So what I see happening in 2026, and I've talked about this before as well, is Democrats taking back the House, but I see GOP keeping the Senate. Just when you look at the different Senate seats that are up for re-election, most likely the GOP will hold on to the Senate. And then in 2028, whichever Democrat wins the primary will win the general election, and that blue wave will come. The House will remain blue, and the Senate, along with the general election, will turn blue, and then they'll have 2 years of Democrat control, and we'll go through the same motions. There'll be a lot of continuing CRs. We'll probably see a few more government shutdowns over the next 10, 12 years, because the contrast between the two ideologies is widening. Everyone's becoming more staunch Republican or more staunch Democrat, and that's reflected in Congress. So any president for the next 10, 12 years, and since 2016, has to ride the 2-year waves that they get. So the constant CRs will continue, threats of a government shutdown will continue, and we'll probably see more government shutdowns because of it. Again, my predictions all the way till 2036, where we might actually see our first 2 consecutive term presidents since Obama. But I digress with all of that. Let's get back to the situation right now. The government is officially shut down and everyone is finger pointing. So overall, both parties are to blame for the shutdown. They've had 6 months to come up with an actual budget, so we don't even need a continuing resolution. And they haven't been able to do that. And we should have predicted they haven't been able to do that because they're so different in what they want for the American people. And when I say the ideologies are different, the ideologies have always been different. But what I mean is, what both parties believe and what their voters who put them in Congress believe is going to be best for the American people moving forward are night and day from each other. There's no more compromise. There's no more trying to see the pros and cons of the other side's ideas. It's just the other side has this idea. It's got to be bad. And now we're going to look for all the reasons why it's going to be bad. And that's what we are going to do to promote voting against it. The truth is, there shouldn't have needed to be a CR because they've had 6 months to develop an all-new budget. But none of that matters now because here we are. As for the government being shut down today, I fault congressional Democrats. Now, congressional Democrats on social media and the media over the last week have been screaming about the ACA tax credits that are set to expire in November. And if you're unfamiliar with this, when ACA was passed, there was a series of tax credits that were passed along with it, which made ACA affordable, essentially. And I guess you could make the argument if ACA, the Affordable Care Act, needed tax credits to make it actually affordable, which then comes with the risk of these tax credits expiring and healthcare costs skyrocketing, then it was never affordable to begin with. The bottom line was ACA was designed to push us into a single-payer system. Tax credits or not, the cost of healthcare has skyrocketed since 2012. If you pay into premiums, and you have been since before 2012, then you know what I'm talking about. Premiums have shot up exponentially, and out-of-pocket costs have gone up as well. It used to be you go to the doctor for the basic stuff, and it was covered by insurance, and your premiums were affordable. Now, premiums are through the roof, and you can't go to a doctor without getting a bill in the mail. But this was kind of done on purpose to push people to a single-payer system, essentially, a national healthcare system. I'm not against the idea of a national healthcare system. It's just we always get preached that we need one, and we're going to love it. It'll be best, and then that's it. If you want people to buy into it, you need to get into the details. You need to answer questions, tough questions about how it's going to work. And you need to understand and be realistic with people when explaining there are pros and cons to everything. And a national healthcare system will have pros and cons in comparison to our current healthcare system. So that was the original intent. If you pay into premiums, your premiums are going to go up. If you cannot afford health insurance, you're going to be covered if you show up at the hospital anyway. And that coverage is because everyone else is paying more and more into premiums. Eventually, people are going to be paying so much into premiums, it's going to be unaffordable for them. And they're going to want a national health system to bring their own personal costs down. So back in the very beginning, when ACA was being developed, people were very scared of a national health system because they had been fear-mongered into believing it was going to be the worst healthcare you've ever gotten, and it was going to be too expensive on top of it. And people pushing for a national healthcare system were trying to get buy-in by claiming it was going to actually bring individual costs down for everybody, and the care would be efficient enough. And then the little annoying things like no more filling out paperwork, none of that stuff. You just go to a doctor when you need to see a doctor, and it's all taken care of because taxes are coming out of your paycheck to take care of it. But it wasn't getting the kind of traction it needed to get enough people to tell their representatives in Congress to sign off on a national healthcare system. So instead, they came up with ACA, which forces everyone to buy insurance. Huge payday for the insurance companies. And then for people who can afford insurance, their healthcare is covered by everyone else who's paying into the system. So inevitably, especially when you add tax credits and over time you start to raise the eligibility for not having to pay the full amount in premiums, inevitably everyone who's paying into it is going to pay more and more and more and more, while more and more people don't have to pay anything at all or are not covering their fair share. So it takes away that middle ground. Either you're paying extremely high premiums that you can't afford, or you're essentially getting your health care for free. Eventually, the people paying extremely high premiums are realizing this is not fair. Why can't I just drop my insurance and get free health care like the people who aren't paying into it? And that's when they come in and say, there's a fix for all this, the national system. That was the overall goal. And the only reason why I'm bringing it up here in this episode, when we can have an entire episode on talking about our healthcare system, is because Democrats over the last week in the House and Senate have been preaching that they don't want to sign off on this Republican CR because it doesn't address the fact that these ACA tax credits are going to expire in November. So if you're lower income and you got approved to have discounted medical premiums, that's thanks to the ACA tax credit. And if that tax credit goes away, you won't get access to those discounted premiums. And Democrats don't want to see this happen, and that's a legit concern. You don't want the people who make the least amount of money in society to not be able to afford their health care. So they spent the last week on social media and on the news and in Congress saying they don't want to sign off on this GOP CR because this GOP CR doesn't address these expiring tax credits. So then, Eric, why are you blaming them for the government shutdown? There's two things on this expiring tax credits argument. Number one, the House passes the CR, goes to the Senate. Senate Democrats try to add $1.5 trillion of spending to the continuing resolution. That doesn't exactly make sense to me. So my thing is, you've had 6 months to work out a budget. If you're going to add $1.5 trillion in spending, why can't you itemize exactly what that spending is going to and make it public? Why do we have to rely on congressional Republicans saying one thing, congressional Democrats saying another thing? Which one do you believe? Why don't you just show us? Why don't you just lay out exactly what that $1.5 trillion is going to? I mean, itemized. Line one, $1 goes to this. Line two, $48 goes to that. Line three, $1,374 goes to this. Show the American people exactly where you intend that money to go. Now, of course, there's always the argument that regardless of where money is intended to go, language in these bills can sometimes be vague so that NGOs and other people can find ways to take advantage and get funding that wasn't really intended for them. And that's part of the Republican argument that even though it's against the law for illegals to receive Medicaid and Medicare and some of these other social benefits in some form or another, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And that's a legit argument too. If someone shows up to the hospital and needs emergency care, they're not checking to see if that person is legal or illegal first, right? They're providing the care. And if they're illegal and they don't have medical insurance, that care is being covered for by Medicare or by the rest of us paying into our premiums. Some way or another, if someone is physically in the country and they need emergency care, then they're receiving medical care, whether they pay into it or not. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, in a roundabout way, what the Republicans are saying is true. However, that doesn't mean, as the Republicans are trying to portray, that Democrats are allowing illegal residents to go to a certain website and sign up for free healthcare. So both sides are correct in their arguments. It's just there's gray area there that they're not touching. But the problem I have with the 1.5 trillion additional spending that the Democrats tried to add to the CR is that if this was about the ACA credits being extended so they don't expire, those ACA credits are roughly $35 billion for the year. Over a 10-year period, that's only $350 billion. So if the focus truly was to make sure ACA tax credits get extended, then they should have only asked for an additional $35 billion for the next year's worth of a budget, not $1.5 trillion. If they were on TV saying all we're asking for is an additional $35 billion to keep those tax credits good for another year, that is an easy bipartisan thing to add. $35 billion in the grand scheme of things is not a lot of money, especially in a continuing resolution, which is continuing the current spending level. Or if you want to extend this over 10 years, $35 billion a year for the next 10 years to keep those tax credits going is $350 billion. So what is the remaining $1.15 trillion that Democrats are trying to sneak into the CR? Can we get an itemized list of this to see it? So that way people can start calling their congressmen and women, whether they're Democrat or Republican, and telling them, yes, they want to add this or not add that stuff to the CR. Why is it we can't ever get a clear picture of exactly what is trying to be added? All we, the voter, have to go on is what these politicians are saying on TV. And of course, the Republican politician is going to paint it as the most worst thing in the world for them to try to add 1.5 trillion in spending. And the Democrat politician is going to paint it as, if we don't do this, the world's going to end. Can we just see exactly what it is that you plan on spending $1.5 trillion on? So that's the first thing for me. It just doesn't add up. Simply extending the ACA tax credits would cost $35 billion a year or $350 billion over the next 10 years. So what is this extra $1.15 trillion you're trying to sneak in? The second reason I blame Democrats for this particular shutdown, again, overall, the shutdown is both parties' fault because they've had 6 months to work out a budget. But the other reason why I feel the government being shut down right this second is the Democrats' fault is because they didn't need to vote no on this CR in order to still work out the ACA tax credits not expiring in November. Let's put it this way. Did voting no on the CR extend the ACA tax credits? No. So now they still have to work to get the ACA tax credits extended, only they still have to do that with the government now closed. If they would have signed the continuing resolution, they would still have to work on the ACA tax credits being extended, but the government would still be open. The CR itself was nothing but making sure the government stayed open past October 1 because the budget hasn't been fully negotiated and worked out yet. So I don't see how Democrats not signing off on the CR was taking a stance on protecting healthcare when the things they want to be protected still need to be worked out. And they could have worked all this out with the government still open. Now they have to deal with trying to paint this narrative that the shutdown is the Republicans' fault on top of working out extension to the ACA tax credits. So it just made no sense to me to not sign off on the CR. But that's where we stand right now. Now, the government is shut down, but it could last a day. It could last 3 days. It could last 2 weeks. Just because they didn't get the CR signed by midnight of September 30th doesn't mean it can't be signed by 3 p.m. October 1, by noon, October 2, etc. So the CR itself was for 7 weeks, but that doesn't mean the government's going to be shut down for the next 7 weeks. Congress can work out and sign a CR at any time, really. But I predict it'll be shut down for at least a few days, maybe a week or so, because that gives both parties time to go on TV and start to point fingers. This is where politics comes into play. So what's not politics is Congress being unable to come up with an actual budget due to what I said earlier, the stark contrast between the two main ideologies. That's why they haven't even been able to work out a full budget in the last 6 months, and that's going to continue. But where politics comes into play here is now that the government is shut down, instead of fixing it immediately, it's better for each party to let the shutdown ride a little bit and get in the media and blame the other party. Now we're playing politics. Midterms are coming up next year. Both sides now are going to need to try to take advantage of the shutdown to make the other party look bad so they can win midterms. Because when you think about it realistically, what the Democrats are concerned with are the ACA tax credits expiring. That's not till November. So they technically have themselves a month to fearmonger on those tax credits expiring, plus the government being shut down, blaming the Republicans for it. The Republicans, on the other hand, can do the same thing. They seem to be okay with letting the ACA tax credits expire. So there really is no time frame for them for when the government needs to be reopened in order to make themselves look better. They can call this the Schumer shutdown and continue to push that every single day until a CR is signed to open the government back up. So I think this will go on at least a week, maybe even longer. And if they're really worried about like government employees and their pay, here's where we stand on that. Federal employees will get a full paycheck on Thursday, October 3rd, because that pay period is September 7th through September 20th. And that pay period was funded. Everything was funded through September 30th. So on Thursday, October 3rd, even though they're shut down, all federal employees will get a full paycheck. 2 weeks later, on October 17th, federal employees will get a roughly 70% paycheck. And that's funding for pay period starting September 21st and would have ended October 5th. But the government was only funded through September 30th. So that paycheck on October 17th will be for their work between September 21st and September 30th. So roughly 70% of their pay. 2 weeks after that is when they'll start missing paychecks. So really, if the government is shut down between October 1st and October 17th, and then they sign a CR or they sign something to open the government back up, then government employees won't miss a single paycheck. Plus, those 3 weeks that they were now furloughed, they will get back pay for. So there's no risk to government pay at all as long as they open back up before the 17th. If they don't open back up before the 17th, then on the 17th, federal employees will get a partial paycheck, and then they won't get another one again until it opens back up. They'll still get back pay, so they're getting paid for all this time that they're not working, but it won't start coming in until they open the government back up. So if you're worried about federal employees and their paychecks and food on their table and paying their bills, they're pretty much good from now until October 17th. And both sides in Congress know this, so they can continue to hold the line, whatever stance they're taking, and keep the government shut down until at least October 17th before it really starts to affect the individuals who are furloughed. But even at that just gives both parties more fire when trying to make negotiations for a new budget, because they can blame the other side for the reason why now, after October 17th, federal employees aren't getting paychecks. Now, another argument with all of this is that this is what the GOP wanted. This is what Trump wanted because it gives him certain powers to reduce the force even more. And I think that's a legit argument. I think deep down, most of the GOP and Congress was hoping the government would shut down. Let's not give Democrats what they want so they don't vote on our CR, so the government shuts down. Trump ran on reduction in force. Trump ran on lessening the bureaucracy. And a shutdown stops all spending immediately. So in turn, that means wasteful spending is also stopped. Now, wasteful spending is subjective. What Trump considers to be wasteful spending, many might not. But regardless, the government shutting down does give Trump and the GOP some of the leverage that they wanted to reduce the force even more. Now, but the president can't just say, we're in a shutdown, so here, I'm going to cut all these government agencies and positions. That's not how it works. But the longer that the shutdown lasts, the more of a chance that agencies, due to lack of funding, have to reduce in size because they don't have the discretionary funding to continue to pay for the current force. And there are legal challenges to do. This is not the first go around. Through different pieces of legislation and through different statutes that have been held up in court, there are certain powers that the president has during a shutdown when it comes to reducing the force, working with agencies to reduce the force, and then certain powers he does not have. So if this shutdown only lasts 2 or 3 weeks, the reduction in force that a lot of Republicans are screaming for is not going to happen. If the shutdown were to last a few months, there's more of a chance that when it finally does reopen, it reopens at a lot less levels than it had when it was shut down. Even that would go through a bunch of legal challenges before anything like that became permanent. So when people say the GOP wanted this shutdown so they can reduce the force, true, but realistically, it's not going to happen unless the government remains shut down for months at a time. But what it could do to benefit Trump in wanting to reduce the force is the longer that we're shut down, the longer a lot of the stuff that was being paid for is not being paid for and is not being done. And the more they can highlight that since XYZ is not being done, it hasn't affected anyone negatively. So why do we need to keep that anyway? When someone fearmongers, if we cut funding to this, it's going to be the end of the world. And then you cut funding to it and the world doesn't end, you're calling that bluff. They tried to tell you that the world is going to end if we stopped funding for XYZ. We've stopped funding for XYZ. The world didn't end. Therefore, we don't need to reopen XYZ at all. And again, there's pros and cons of that. I mean, in order to get to that point, the government has to be shut down for a certain amount of time. But at the same time, if you can truly identify waste in a general sense, meaning here's something we've been paying for that once we stopped paying for it, it didn't hurt anybody. So maybe we should not pay for it anymore. That's a good thing all around. But I don't see the shutdown lasting long enough to get to that point. So we're all going to be relying on what our politicians tell us. And you're generally going to believe what your side tells you over what the other side tells you. So now, what does this mean for the overall budget? Not being able to get this CR signed is what shut down the government. But there still needs to be an overall budget or just mass amounts of continuing resolution. And like I said, during the Biden administration, there was never a budget passed. It was a continuing resolution passed every single time for all 4 years. So what's it going to take for them to come together and pass an actual budget? And this goes back to the divide I was talking about. I don't think they're going to be able to come together to pass an actual budget. Just the ideologies and what both ideologies believe is going to be best moving forward from a monetary standpoint are way too different to find compromise. I believe both parties and both ideologies want the overall best for the American people. It's just what they believe will be the overall best for the American people is different. So one of two things is going to happen. We're going to CR after CR, and it's going to be one-sided. And the only reason why the other side is going to vote for it is to not have a long-term government shutdown. All the way up until midterms when they flip the House and there's gridlock in Congress, and then they'll have to pass more CRs with a little bit more compromise, but they're never going to agree on a full budget. And this will happen all the way until 2028. And then the blue wave hits and Congress and the White House is controlled by Democrats, and they'll have 2 years to try to pass a budget. That's one option that's going to happen over the next few years. The other option is, how do we get an actual budget passed instead of a CR? Is a budget is going to have to be passed on party lines by the GOP since they have control of the White House, the Senate, and the House. CRs require 60 votes in the Senate to pass. That's why we're in a shutdown right now, because the GOP needed 7 or 8 Democrat senators to sign off on the CR, and they didn't. But budget reconciliation does not require 60 votes to pass. The congressional majority, in this case it's the GOP, at least until the midterms, can reconcile the budget without support from the other side. Budget reconciliation only requires simple majority. Now, they don't have to go into reconciliation. They could technically write up a budget. Democrats sign off no on it, goes to the Senate. You need 60 votes, and they can end any attempt to filibuster by applying the nuke rule. To nuke a filibuster only requires simple majority, and then once a filibuster is nuked, it allows legislation to be passed on a simple majority. But this hasn't been done for now 5 years. This wasn't done at all during the Biden administration because it's politically dangerous to pass legislation on party lines. This is where it goes back to politics. A continuing resolution is easily arguable on party lines. You can make the argument that you're trying to negotiate. You reconcile the budget and pass it without the other side. You're openly admitting we are not negotiating. We are not compromising with half the country. And that's politically hard to overcome. However, if the GOP wants to do that, they should, because they're not going to overcome the midterms anyway. Like I've been saying, naturally, the House is going to go blue in the midterm. For my entire life, no party has had full control of the White House, Senate, and the House of Representatives for more than 2 years. So if the GOP really wants to get their budget passed, they should reconcile the budget and just pass it on party lines because they're going to lose the House anyway come 2026. And again, this goes back to the divide I was talking about because the only way the GOP is going to be able to pass the Trump agenda is to do so without negotiating with the Democrat Party. And then in 2028, when a Democrat is in the White House and the blue wave hits and they have control of Congress, the only way they're going to be able to pass a budget is on party lines as well. So if either party wants to get a budget passed right now with this divide that we have in this country, they're going to have to do it on party lines. Otherwise, we're going to get nothing but continuing resolutions indefinitely, at least until, like I predicted, 2036, where we may actually see a second consecutive term president, and we may be far enough out of the Trump era where people can start coming together a little bit and becoming more moderate again. We're just in the part of the accordion wave where the divide is very, very stark and the amount of moderates are less and less, but it will come back over time. So with that, let's see how long this government shutdown lasts. Like I said, I predict it'll last probably between 1 and 3 weeks, simply because it doesn't affect the pay for government employees for these next 3 weeks, because the pay periods are staggered. So they're still going to get a full paycheck this week and at least a 70% paycheck 2 weeks after that. But let me know what you think. I'm just guessing here. Let me know in the comments. You can email me at eric.middleviewmedia@gmail.com, and I will try to address it on follow-on episodes. Thank you guys for listening to this episode. We'll talk to you again next week. 5 Head out.